I'm 54 years old, a senior financial consultant, and until that afternoon, I had been a loyal wife and a devoted mother. We were at Palmetto Grove, a high-end restaurant in Charleston, to celebrate my daughter Madison's graduation from college. Friends, relatives, former colleagues all gathered to toast her achievements. The champagne was poured, the food was served, and the room buzzed with polite conversation and clinking silverware. Then, in a moment so sharply timed it could have been rehearsed, David, my husband of 28 years, stood up. Still holding his glass, he looked around the room, then said, "I've decided to start a new life without you." For a beat there was silence. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died in people's throats. Eyes darted from him to me, waiting for a scene. A gasp, a cry, a public unraveling. Instead, I smiled. "Congratulations on your honesty," I said, reaching into my handbag and placing a sealed envelope beside his plate. David blinked. "What is this?" "Something for you to read later." I turned to Madison, kissed her on the cheek, and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. This day is still about you." Then I stood, straightened my dress, and faced the stunned guests. "Please enjoy your meal. I wish you all a lovely afternoon." And with that, I walked out of the restaurant, no tears, no dramatics, just the quiet grace of someone who had been planning this moment for months. As the heavy glass door shut behind me, the South Carolina summer heat wrapped around me like a curtain. For the first time in years I could breathe, and behind me, I heard the door slam again. "Rachel," David called, his voice no longer confident but shaky. "What the hell is this?" I didn't turn around. The envelope was just the beginning. David always had the charm, the vision, the big dreams. I had the spreadsheets, the strategy, and the follow-through. While he chased startup ideas and entrepreneurial reinventions, I built the foundation that kept our family standing. I postponed opening my own financial consultancy when he launched his third business. I took on extra hours when he left his job to find himself making custom furniture. I managed every tax return, every budget, every college savings plan. And I did it all without resentment. At least that's what I told myself. Because we were building a life. Because Madison needed stability. Because it's what wives do, right? Madison was the heart of that life. She was curious, quick-witted, and full of promise. She had David's charisma, and my pragmatism, a dangerous and beautiful mix. Every decision I made was with her in mind. When David failed, I buffered her from the consequences. When he faltered, I made sure the light stayed on, and her dreams stayed intact. I wore patience like armor. I wore self-sacrifice like a badge. And somewhere along the way, I forgot to ask myself what I wanted. I used to have a dream. Before marriage. Before motherhood. I wanted to create a consultancy just for women navigating transitions, loss, and reinvention. But it was always after Madison graduates, or when David finds his footing, or maybe next year. Then next year became next decade. Looking back, it's not just David who betrayed me. I betrayed myself too, in tiny, quiet ways. Every time I swallowed what I needed. Every time I called survival love. That day at the restaurant wasn't about rage or revenge. It was about truth. The truth of who I had become, someone so busy protecting everyone else that she had forgotten she was a person too. David thought his announcement would catch me off guard. He thought I'd collapse, or at least cry. But I had already mourned the marriage in silence, already buried the illusions. All that remained now was the execution. And for the first time in decades, I felt like the main character in my own life. 3 months before the graduation party, I noticed a $137 charge from a wine bar in Hilton Head. David was supposed to be in Atlanta that week, consulting for a former business partner. I didn't confront him, not yet. I told myself maybe it was a client meeting. Maybe it was nothing. But then came a series of similar charges: boutique hotels, high-end restaurants, a spa package. All on our joint card, all on weekends when he claimed to be working late or visiting his mother. After 2 decades managing both our finances, these irregularities stood out like bruises. I knew how to follow money, and this trail led somewhere I hadn't dared imagine. I pulled our statements for the last year. I created a spreadsheet, color-coded it, tracked every transfer from our joint accounts to one labeled Drew Holdings, an account I hadn't opened. David had been quietly funneling funds, sometimes just a few hundred, sometimes thousands. Over the span of 13 months, it added up to nearly $58,000. I dug deeper. That's when I found Chloe Bennett. She was listed as a co-signer on a luxury apartment lease flagged in our shared credit inquiry. A search revealed she'd once worked at an events firm David hired years ago. She was 37, blonde, recently self-employed. She had also attended our Christmas party 2 years ago. I remember her wearing red heels and bringing gourmet cookies she claimed were homemade. She laughed too hard at David's jokes and called me Ma, even though I was only in my early 50s. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was financial, emotional, and social. Our friends had seen them together. And no one said a word. Silence, I've learned, is its own kind of betrayal. Then came the texts. David left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter one night. I didn't snoop. I didn't need to. A preview message popped up. Counting down the days. After Saturday, we're finally free. He planned to leave me right after Madison's graduation, publicly, dramatically. But David underestimated me. He forgot I was the woman who made sure he never missed a mortgage payment, even when he forgot we had one. He forgot I was the woman who read every line, every clause including the prenuptial agreement he had insisted on 28 years ago. Especially the fidelity clause. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even confront him, not yet. Instead, I started planning. While David was busy pretending to be the charming husband and future beachside retiree, I was quietly consulting a lawyer named Aaron Phelps. Aaron was sharp, discreet, and had a particular expertise in asset tracing and high-stakes divorce cases. She listened carefully as I laid everything out: the transfers, the affair, the apartment lease, the messages. She didn't blink. "We'll need documentation," she said. "A lot of it. But Rachel, you're in a strong position, especially if the prenup still holds." I found the original prenuptial agreement in our safe. Ironically, David had insisted on it back, then to protect a potential inheritance he never ended up receiving. But the document was solid and very much enforceable. Most importantly, it contained a clause stating that if either party was found to have committed adultery during the marriage, the aggrieved spouse would retain full claim to shared property and retirement holdings. David must have assumed it expired or was just symbolic. He was wrong. Over the next 2 months, I documented everything. I printed financial records, organized email threads, saved text screenshots, even discreetly recorded a few conversations in our home. One night, he told Chloe, "After Madison's big day, I'll announce it. In public's better, Rachel hates scenes. She'll just swallow it." That single recording would prove invaluable. I filed the divorce papers 10 days before Madison's graduation. They were processed and sealed by the court, undisclosed to David for the time being. The envelope I handed him during the party contained a personal copy of the filing, a breakdown of his infidelity violations, and a reminder of the active prenup clause he clearly hadn't read in decades. The look on his face when I walked away from that table was the moment I'd waited for, not out of revenge, but clarity. I wasn't acting out of spite. I was reclaiming power. Every betrayal had been a thread pulled from the fabric of our marriage. I just made sure he was the one holding the scissors when it finally tore apart. And I made one more decision. I wouldn't let Madison be caught in the crossfire. This was between David and me. She would know everything in time, but for now, she deserved to celebrate. She had worked too hard to have her moment ruined. So I smiled through the celebration. I toasted her future. I hugged family members who had no idea the storm that had already begun. David thought he'd blindside me. He didn't realize I'd already left the marriage long before he announced it. He just didn't notice because I was never the one who needed attention to feel alive. By the time David stumbled out of the restaurant that afternoon, I was already halfway home. Not our home, my home now. The 2-story colonial in Charleston's historic district had always been more mine than his. I picked the paint colors, maintained the books, paid the taxes. David just liked to tell people he owned it. I parked in the driveway and walked in like I belonged there because I did. Everything looked the same, but felt different. The family portraits on the wall. The throw blanket Madison crocheted in high school. Even David's favorite leather recliner, all frozen in the moment before everything changed. I went upstairs to the master closet. Just as I suspected, his bags were already packed. 2 suitcases tucked neatly behind the coats. He had been planning his exit for tomorrow, after his grand announcement. Predictable, as always. My phone buzzed endlessly. Texts from friends at the party. Missed calls from David's sister Laura. a message from Madison asking, "Are you okay?" I replied only to her, "I'm fine. This isn't yours to carry. We'll talk tonight. I love you." 3 hours later, I heard David's car slam into the driveway like a storm. The door flew open. "Rachel," he bellowed. "What the hell is this?" I was in the living room, sipping tea, reviewing documents on my laptop, calm as ever. He stormed in, waving the envelope like it had physically attacked him. "You served me divorce papers. Today of all days." "I thought it aligned nicely with your plans," I said. "You wanted to start a new life. I'm simply facilitating the transition." "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted, "just like you had the right to choose Chloe." He sneered. "The prenup expired years ago. Any lawyer will tell you that." I smiled. Actually, it didn't. Section 12. Fidelity clause. Active through the duration of the marriage. Your lawyer should have told you that. "Oh wait, you didn't consult one, did you?" The color drained from his face. He hadn't expected me to know the law. He certainly hadn't expected me to use it. I reached for my phone and pressed play. His voice filled the room. "After graduation, I'll tell her it's over. Public setting is better. She won't cause a scene in front of people." Then Chloe's voice, "She has no idea about the money, right?" And David again, "None. Rachel trusts me completely. That's her weakness." He staggered back like I'd hit him. "You recorded me?" he whispered. "In Georgia, one-party consent is legal. And I wasn't recording your private moments. I'm not cruel. Just your plans to steal from me." David sat down hard on the couch. He looked smaller somehow. "I need to make some calls," he muttered. I nodded. "Start with a lawyer." I had already packed a bag. Laura offered me her guest room. I was done playing nice. He'd made his move. Mine just cost more. Laura's bungalow sat just 10 minutes across town, tucked behind a row of crepe myrtles and ivy-covered fences. She greeted me at the door with no words, just a long, fierce hug. "I just got off the phone with Madison," she said quietly as she poured 2 glasses of wine. "She's on her way." I nodded. "She deserves the truth. Just not today." "You gave her one more day of peace," Laura said. "That matters." We settled in her sunroom, surrounded by stacks of novels and the scent of lavender from the garden. It was a space built for reflection, something I'd avoided for years. "What was in that envelope?" she finally asked. "Divorce papers, a summary of the money trail, and a copy of our prenup." Laura laughed softly. "I remember when David made you sign that thing. He was terrified you'd take his startup money if things didn't work out." "The irony is rich, isn't it?" I said, raising my glass. 20 minutes later, Madison arrived still in her graduation dress, mascara smudged, confusion turning to fury in her eyes. She stepped into my arms like she had as a child after a bad dream. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because this was your day," I whispered. "You earned it. And I wasn't going to let your father's betrayal stain your achievement." She pulled back, jaw tight. He ruined it anyway. We moved into the living room, and I gave her the full story, how I'd discovered the affair, the financial lies, and his plan to blindside me publicly. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "He was always on edge, always checking his phone. But I never thought." "No one ever does," Laura said softly, "until it's too late." Before we could say more, the doorbell rang. Laura opened it and came back with a clenched jaw. "It's David. And she's with him." Chloe looked exactly as I remembered, too polished, too nervous. Her smile faltered the second she saw Madison standing beside me. David stepped forward. "Rachel, this has gone far enough. Unfreeze the accounts. We need to talk like adults." Madison stood, her voice ice cold. "You should have tried being an adult before blowing up our family." David blinked, clearly not expecting resistance from her. "This doesn't concern you," he said. "It absolutely does," she shot back. "You lied to Mom. You lied to me. You pretended we were broke while I was working 2 jobs to afford textbooks." Chloe touched David's arm. "Maybe we should go." He brushed her hand away. "I'm not leaving until we fix this." Laura folded her arms. "You don't fix a shattered house by yelling at the wreckage, David." I said nothing. I'd said all I needed to. It was their turn to feel what silence truly sounded like. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the confrontation at Laura's house. Rain tapped steadily against the courthouse windows, the the kind of weather that made everything feel heavier. I arrived with Aaron, my attorney, calm, prepared, focused. David showed up 10 minutes late with a young lawyer who looked like he'd never handled a divorce case in his life. I later learned David had hired a corporate attorney, someone better suited to mergers than marriages. A poor choice, but fitting. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and little patience for theatrics, reviewed the documents. She asked pointed questions, listened closely. Then she opened the prenuptial agreement. "This document appears valid and intact," she said, flipping through the pages. "Counselor, do you contest its enforceability?" David's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, due to the length of the marriage, we believe the agreement has expired or become irrelevant." The judge interrupted. Section 18 states clearly that the agreement remains valid through the duration of the marriage and any legal proceedings related to its dissolution. There is no expiration clause. David leaned over, whispering furiously into his lawyer's ear. The judge turned her attention to the financial evidence. Systematic transfers of funds, undisclosed accounts, a pattern of deceit that directly violates the transparency requirement outlined in Section 23. She looked up. "The court will maintain the freeze on all joint accounts pending full financial discovery. Mr. Whitmore's personal account will remain accessible only for basic living expenses. The family home, as per the infidelity clause, remains in Mrs. Whitmore's possession during proceedings." David's face turned deep red. "This is outrageous," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. The judge shot him a look that could slice glass. "You signed this agreement. I suggest you read it more carefully next time." Court adjourned. Outside in the hallway, David tried to follow me. "Rachel, please, let's be reasonable. We've been married 28 years. I paused, looked him in the eye. "And you threw all of that away for a secret apartment, a second bank account, and a woman who calls me ma'am." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "I made mistakes," he said, voice lower. "Can't we find some kind of middle ground?" "There is no middle between betrayal and self-respect." I walked away without another word. In the days that followed, word spread through our social circle. Some friends reached out quietly supportive. Others wanted details, gossip fuel. I gave none. All I said was, "David and I are separating. These things happen." But they don't just happen. They're built. Brick by brick. Lie by lie. And the people who build them never think the structure will fall. Until it does. And they're standing in the rubble. Alone. It didn't take long for David's world to begin unraveling. Just 2 weeks after the hearing, Laura called me with a trace of amusement in her voice. "You'll never guess Chloe moved out." I wasn't surprised, but I admit the speed of her departure was impressive. "She told Jennifer that David's business is in worse shape than he let on," Laura said. "Apparently the financial cushion he promised was mostly in his imagination. The beachfront condo? Gone. The luxury SUV. Lease cancelled. Even the apartment they signed for had been flagged because I had intercepted the credit verification call weeks earlier and flagged it for inconsistencies." David's illusion was collapsing under its own weight. Meanwhile, I was building something real. I leased a small office downtown and registered my business, Whitmore Financial Transitions. My first 2 clients were women in their 50s navigating divorces of their own. They cried in my office. They asked questions no one had ever answered for them. And I listened, then showed them exactly where their money was going and how to get it back. Within a month, word of mouth took over. By the end of the quarter, I had a wait list. I wasn't just crunching numbers anymore. I was giving women tools to rebuild their lives. And it felt right. Madison called often from Charleston, where she had taken a job in marketing. Her voice on the other end of the line became a kind of tether, gentle, steady, always curious. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said one evening. "You're helping people through some of the hardest moments of their lives." I smiled into the phone. I'm doing what I wish someone had done for me. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about purpose. Identity. Reclamation. I had spent so many years being a wife and a mother, I'd forgotten the power of being a woman with her own name on the door. David, meanwhile, had moved into a modest apartment across town. His calls became less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Our communication was handled through lawyers. There was nothing left to say. What Madison and I had rebuilt through honesty, through shared grief, through mutual respect, was stronger than anything David had broken. And in the quiet that followed the storm, I realized something. I hadn't lost a life. I had finally walked into one that was fully mine. No compromises, no secrets. Just the open space of a second chance and the clarity to know exactly what to do with it. The final divorce hearing landed on what would have been our 29th anniversary. Fitting, I thought. The judge upheld the prenup in full. I kept the house, most of the investments, my retirement intact. David walked away with what was left in his personal account, just enough for rent and regrets. As we exited the courtroom, he looked at me one last time. "I made a terrible mistake," he said quietly. "Is there any chance we could?" "No," I replied, calm and clear. "That door is closed." 6 months later, my consultancy had grown. I'd hired 2 associates. Women came to me in pain and left with plans, confidence, and dignity. Madison once said, "If Dad had just told the truth, maybe he could have kept half." "Maybe," I replied, "but some people can't see past what they want until it's gone." If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there may need to know that reinvention